So now we're moving on to Unit 10, and just a quick reminder, we have 4 unit tests and 4 units before the AP exam. So we have Unit 10, 11, 12, and 13 are 1, and 14. 4 more tests to go. So Unit 10 is on personality, and we're going to have 4 sets of notes for this unit, each one looking at a different perspective and theory of personality. So the first one we're looking at is psychoanalytic, which becomes psychodynamic essentially in the 20th century, or later in the 20th century, I should say, and how they view and explain personality, which is a really interesting take, right? Because it is Freud the freak. So in his clinical practice, Freud encountered patients suffering from nervous disorders whose complaints could not be explained in terms of purely physical causes. So he looked at and explained the psychological cause of the ailments as something that was going on with their personality. So from this, he developed his first, or the first, comprehensive personality theory. And the buzzword of psychoanalytic is the unconscious, right? So a reservoir, right, like that, like holds lots of things. It simply just holds lots of things. The unconscious mind of mostly unacceptable, right, that's the dirty stuff, thoughts, wishes, feelings, and memories that are normally aggressive and sexual. Freud asked patients to say whatever came to their mind to tap the unconscious. So in like a psychoanalysis, where you're analyzing the psyche with that perspective of psychoanalysis, you use what's called free association. So if I say French fries, what comes to mind? Whatever you're thinking about right now, if you just say that out loud with no filter, no thinking, just say it, that would be free association. So the process of free association and that chain of thoughts led to painful, embarrassing, unconscious memories, right? That's a way to reveal the unconscious in a therapy session. Once these memories were retrieved and released, that's the treatment, the psychoanalysis, the patient would then feel better. Okay, so, excuse me, there's 2 big things here. There's parts of the mind, and then we're going to look at parts of personality. Let's first look at parts of the mind. According to psychoanalysts, the mind is like an iceberg. This is an analogy. You wouldn't write about this analogy in an FRQ. I mean, I guess you could, as long as you explained what is the conscious, preconscious, and unconscious, not just in the context of an iceberg. So with the largest and most important part of our consciousness being the biggest part of the iceberg down at the bottom here, right? But the idea is that this is hidden from awareness. It's out of awareness, but it can dictate your behavior. Just like the bottom of the iceberg very much dictates the top of the tip of the iceberg, right? So the tip of the iceberg is consciousness, what you're currently aware of. The preconscious is what you can see if you're standing or in a ship, right? If you're on the Titanic looking into the water, the part of the iceberg you can see is your preconscious. It's info not in consciousness, but is retrievable as needed. Like George Washington, okay, now it's in your consciousness. But before I said that, he wasn't, he was in your mind, and it's very accessible. George Washington is, and your memories of him being the first president of the United States. But you're not thinking of that in that moment. You are now, but now you're not. So how does the unconscious influence us? Well, there's the latent content of dreams, which we talked about back in Unit 5. This being the symbolic meaning of dreams and those images. So that being showing what your unconscious mind is all about. There's also the Freudian slip. So these are slips of the tongue that Freud believed were our true unconscious thoughts surfacing. So an example, a really good example that I have heard a teacher explaining is when they were in science class in like the 6th grade, and they were just reading out loud, because that's what they did a long time ago, reading out loud from their science textbook, and he came across the word organism, and he said orgasm. Woo! Oh, that's rough on a prepubescent boy in the 6th grade. And that was a Freudian slip, maybe revealing some unconscious things going on with him. So kind of an interesting thing. All right, so we looked at parts of the mind. Let's look at personality structure with the id, ego, and superego. This is, think of the angel and the devil on your shoulder. That's what this is all about. And that you have the id is your devil, superego is your angel, and you are your ego. Okay, so let's look at the center of the slide here about ego first. Your ego is your largely conscious you. This functions as the executive between your devil and angel, your id and superego, and mediates the demands of the ego and superego. Okay, it operates on the reality principle. Write that down. It operates on the reality principle, and that I'm right here in the now, and I need to make a decision that's practical for reality, for life. That's how your ego is operating. Your devil, your id, is the your id unconsciously strives to satisfy those basic sexual and aggressive drives, operating on the pleasure principle, demanding instant, immediate gratification. Okay, so your id is your devil. It's the I want it, and I don't care if you don't like that I want it, but I want it, and I want it now. That's the way that the id operates. The superego then is your angel, and it provides standards for judgment. It's the conscience, right? It's your moral part of you, and for the future aspiration. So it operates on the moral principle, right? Morality being your good angel part of you. So Freud believed that personality formed during life's first few years, divided into psychosexual stages. He had to include the word sex somehow, right? During these stages, the id's pleasure-seeking energies focus on pleasure-sensitive body areas called erogenous zones. And no, it's not always the genitals, although yes, it mostly is. But you got to think about, and I'll kind of help you through the stages here, what's going on in the child's life as they develop. So Freud said our personality is developed really early on and then just builds throughout life, which, okay, I get that, but it's probably a reason why he's criticized. So here are the stages. Yes, you need to know them. You need to know them in order, what ages they happen, and what is significant within the stages. So the first stage is oral, and that's from birth to about 1 year old. So think of a child when an infant, right? They are consumed with, you could say their mouths, but that doesn't explain it all. It's eating, right? Like they are born with the sucking reflex. They bite and they swallow. Like that's what they do. And yes, it says that they obtain pleasure that way, but pleasure not being sexually, pleasure just being satisfaction, right? And that's by eating. But also, like my child uses a binky. It helps soothe him, right? This is also a stage in development where a lot of things they put in their mouths, right? They're 1 year old. Of course, they put it in their mouths to experience it and feel what it's like. So that's the oral stage. The anal stage is from 1 to 3, and about the 2 and 3 year mark, think of what's going on in a child's life. They're being potty trained. It's all about the pee and the poo. So pleasure obtained by learning to control bodily waste and putting them in proper places. The third stage is the phallic stage, and I do not want you to Google phallic symbols, but a phallic symbol coming from a Greek god, I think I learned this in mythology way back when, is an erect penis, and that's kind of awkward, but it kind of applies here. So ages 3 to 5, this being the most crucial stage according to Freud, in that the children are curious about their genitalia and deal with incestuous feelings. Yes, I said incest, and yes, it just got real, got awkward. We're going to talk about that, but think about it, like the little boys and girls, they like see their parts. And they're like, what's this for? And they recognize that mommy has but doesn't have other parts, and daddy has parts that mommy doesn't have, and they're curious about that. And as they should be, right? Like they should learn about themselves and the human anatomy, and we shouldn't be embarrassed about that. But let's talk about these complexes, and this coming from some Greek mythology as well. Oedipus. So Oedipus was this guy who was an orphan raised by an adopted family, I believe, and he grows up to be in an early adulthood stages, and he goes on this long walk and on this long journey to find himself. Essentially, he runs into this what looks like a homeless man, and they get into a squabble, and Oedipus ends up killing this man. He goes on and he finds this town who had just lost their king, and the queen is widowed and very upset, and Oedipus kind of wins the town over, and the queen marries the queen and becomes king of this town, all to find out that that queen is his biological mother, and he killed his biological father on his journey to get there. Incestuous feelings, right? So the Oedipus complex is when a young boy, right, we're talking 3 to 5 years old, has unconscious, it's only unconscious, but it's revealed in some behaviors, according to Freud. Boy has unconscious desires for their mother, and is jealous and has some hatred for dad, and that I want mom, therefore I'm going to try to castrate dad. Well, no, not really, because, castration's in every Greek mythology story. So they fear punishment or castration if dad finds out about these feelings. So it might be the reason why little boys prefer that mommy put them to bed, or that mommy, make their peanut butter and jelly and not daddy, something like that. So then the Electra complex being what Karen Horney, a very applicable name for psychoanalysis, the female version of the Oedipus complex. So the idea that the little girl has those feelings towards dad and hates mom. Now, identification is the end of the phallic stage, where the child copes with those threatening feelings by repressing them, and then by identifying with that rival parent,